Hello everybody, and I'm back with another series review for you guys. I'd promised in my whole video that I would do a series review once I'd finished this, and that is the Under the Never Sky trilogy by Veronica Rossi. So the books in this series are Under the Never Sky, Through the Evernight, and the most recent book, Into the Still Blue. These books are a teen post-apocalyptic science fiction kind of survival adventure trilogy. I know a lot of people often call them dystopias, and while there is an element of the dystopia in the very beginning, most of it is rather actually post-apocalyptic and survivalist. I object a lot to people just initially labeling something as a dystopia. It feels actually just a little lazy just to call something a dystopia just because one particular element has the hints of a dystopia. As I said, most of this is post-apocalyptic and survivalist. So what's the basic premise? The basic story is that you have a young girl named Aria who lives in what are called domes. She lives in one particular one called Reverie. The idea of these domes is that the outside world has such horrid weather conditions caused by what are called ether storms. It's intense amounts of energy which just rip through the earth and completely destroy everything. And Aria is a young girl who lives in one of the domes, these protected sort of habitats in a way that people live in. Well, one day she and a couple of her friends go into this one dome that's supposedly been like kind of wonky, partially damaged, and they end up starting a fire, ripping it open to the outside. Some people from the outside, known to them as like savages or outsiders, kind of sneak their way in. Brief altercation, it doesn't end well. Aria was only doing this because she needed information on her mother, who went to one of the other pods called Bliss and with whom she's lost communication. Needless to say, this whole incident inside the slightly busted dome doesn't go well, and Aria is essentially kicked out of the domes and left to the outside to survive. She's sort of picked up, saved, essentially, by one of the very outsiders who made their way into the busted dome, and his name is Peregrine. He goes by Perry, and what he's trying to do is rescue his nephew, who was taken by some people who live in pods. They're called dwellers, and so they sort of team up in order to get his nephew back and for Aria to find out about her mother. Along the way, we mainly meet all the people from Peregrine's world and his friends. His best friend named Roar, who's searching for Peregrine's sister named Liv, who vanished, and Aria is also maintaining contact with people still in the domes. The very man who kicked her out, and his son, with whom she'd broken into the dome in the first place. The other major player in this is a boy named Cinder. Cinder is this sort of enigmatic young teenage boy that they can't really explain, who has this connection to the ether that doesn't make any sense to really any of the people who encounter him. He's kind of dangerous to himself and to others, and so he tries to stay on the fringe of everything. He's a really sweet character, and I did enjoy him, and his journey over the course of the three novels is really good, really good, and his finale is well done. It's very much a survival kind of novel. You have Aria dealing with now having to live in the elements, and everything isn't just sort of created for her technologically. You definitely have this difference of people with intense amounts of technology and people with virtually none, and essentially two completely different ways of life clashing together. Now, of course, you do have a romance between Aria and Peregrine. It's thankfully not insta-love. It does take place over the course of the first novel, and initially it's just sort of sexual attraction, really. It means physical attraction. It eventually develops into something deeper, but I was willing to forgive that because it didn't just sort of happen instantly. In fact, they really just don't like each other at the beginning, and they're together out of convenience. And of course you know how that's going to end, but again, I can forgive it because it took place over the course of an entire novel as opposed to, you know, over the course of one chapter. We learn some things about Aria while this is going on. We learn that her father was an outsider. She learns this from an old recording from her mom. And we also learn that she has, like Perry, this extrasensory ability. Some people who are outsiders have these extrasensory abilities. You have Ouds who have really sensitive hearing. You have Sires, like Perry, who have sensitive sense of smell. They can essentially sense your tempers. It's the way that animals can really sense if you're afraid or angry or happy. It's something very similar to that. You've also people with night vision, with, you know, better seeing, and all sorts of different abilities and perceptions and senses. I thought it was really cool, and actually the way it's integrated is really well done. So I kind of liked the idea of people having these extra abilities, and actually in the case of Aria, it didn't make her feel like a Mary Sue or anything because it was actually explained really well. And she doesn't just sort of like boom have this ability. It's discovered over the course of the novel and sort of hinted at in the beginning, though you never really have noticed it, and even back then she wouldn't have noticed it just because of the society she lives in. Essentially, the idea of most of this is that people on the outside are trying to get to what's called the still blue. It's this supposed haven that's free from the ether, where they can all live in peace and actually just have long, prosperous lives. The best part of this is probably character arcs over the course of the 3 novels. In terms of each novel individually, it's not that great at times, but actually as a whole, looking at it as a trilogy, the character arcs are really, really well done, especially in the case of Peregrine, because he has to go from being under his brother's thumb to taking over his tribe to having to lead his tribe. It's one thing to take over a tribe and call yourself a leader, it's another to actually be a leader, and he really learns the difference between those, especially through the second book. In the second book, it's actually where you got the most character development, you got the most kind of tension, and the most really well-crafted storytelling. And I think it's because this is Perry after he's taken over the tribe and he's trying to position himself as a true leader. And the conflicts that arise within the tribe, it's totally plausible and totally logical, and it's stuff that you go, yeah, I mean, this is stuff you really have to deal with. And I like that Veronica Rossi took the time to kind of halt her story for a bit. I mean, and the story, in terms of the overarching plot, does take a bit of a halt, but it's okay because this is character development you really need to deal with. This is stuff that you need to address when you're creating a world like this. So needless to say, the world building is really well done in this book. Another thing I really like is that this did not pull an across the universe move in which that, you know, you had a character who seemed to die and then come back. There are a bunch of characters who die in this story and they stay dead. I mean, as much as that sounds horrid that I want them to stay dead, it's, you know, if you kill a character, you do kind of have to leave them dead. Some of the major themes really explored in this series are definitely survival, questions of identity. Racism is probably one of the biggest ones because you get a lot of that between the people from inside the domes and outside the domes, and even within the tribes outside the domes. These tribes, I mean, they're not always getting along with each other either. Yeah, you're dealing with things like love and loyalty and friendship and kind of big things, but I think perhaps, yeah, the biggest one is definitely, I think, racism and racial tension and having to put aside all differences in order to know that you need to achieve the same goal. In this case, they all need to find the still blue and they all need to survive because even the pods are breaking down. I would say if you're into sort of like the teen trilogies, this is one of the better ones you'll find. This is one of the better teen trilogies that are like really popular at the moment that I've read. Because while I like teen lit and I like some of it, a lot of the trilogies usually just don't interest me. And I sort of, you know, if I don't like the first book, I don't keep going. This is one where I read the first book, I thought it was good, read the second book, thought it was great, and read the third book and went, I'm good with that conclusion. It's one of the few series that I finished where I went, yeah, it's good. I don't think it's brilliant, but it's good. But I think that's all I have to say, so until next time, cheers you guys.